Afternoon, gentlemen. I just wanted to probe a little further on this issue of governance gap and regulatory functions. And it's clear that we're talking today about the transposition of legislation, but in essence, legislation isn't worth the paper it's written on if it isn't backed up by regulation, enforcement, monitoring, review. There's approximately 50 EU agencies, in addition to the European Commission, that carry out these roles, ranging from the Medicines Agency to chemicals to food safety, etc. Have you done an assessment of, looking across those functions, how many of those functions will require UK parallel institutions in order to continue the proper enforcement and regulation of these laws and regulations?
We have done such an assessment as part of my work on preparedness. We look at a range of scenarios, as you will know, and departments look at their planning for both a deal and a no-deal scenario, and indeed some additional scenarios, and they are working through what they would need to do. But I should say that there are, of course, a number of parallel UK agencies already, and if you were to look at the trigger conditions in Schedule 7, you can see some of the things which we intend to do, because we've set them out in the bill, establishing a public authority in the UK, etc. We're not in a position to say today how many new authorities might need to be established, but we are working through with departments their plans.
Have you done any sense of costing, what it would cost to establish this array of institutions, either establishing new ones or significantly boosting the capacity, because they would have to be taking on a lot more responsibility, clearly because of our departure from the European Union?
Well, as we announced, the Treasury has allocated £250 million of new money towards preparedness, including for a no deal, as I said in the adjournment debate. But these matters are all taken up in departmental plans.
Thank you. We heard evidence, just burrowing in a little bit on some of the specifics of this. For example, a senior official from the Environment Agency was telling us that they feel that there's a real gap in terms of oversight of the government's role, and a feeling that the government thought that judicial review would be a sufficient means of oversight and accountability. Do you think that judicial review can be used as a regulatory function?
Well, I'm glad that you've raised judicial review, because of course that is one of the remedies which is available in relation to the statutory instruments that we've been discussing throughout. But if I may, can I refer you to the answer that I gave to Mr Crabb some minutes ago, because I have had a meeting with the Secretary of State for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, and I know that he is taking this particular issue extremely seriously.
Well, we had something also from the head of Consumer Affairs saying that, it was from Which, in fact, saying that the British consumer enforcement regime is already stretched to breaking point. Do you feel that departure from the European Union will put additional and unfair levels of pressure on the regime as it currently stands?
I mean, I have to say, a lot of the evidence that I've heard from Which, among others, is that the British consumer legal regime goes a lot further than the European Union's already in many areas, and I don't think that part of the reason why it is perhaps as busy as it is we have some of the best developed consumer protection laws anywhere in the EU. But certainly it's an issue that we take extremely seriously. You will see consumers featured right at the front of our white paper, right at the beginning of this process, and we want to make sure through this piece of legislation that we are protecting consumer rights all the way along.
Just one final question, if I may, Chair. Would you feel that it's acceptable as a principle that, as the current institutions and agencies that protect standards and enable the proper functioning of the market, as currently carried out in partnership between British and EU agencies, as we leave the European Union, that no function that is required due to the transfer of EU legislation into UK legislation should be carried out until such time that there is a UK agency that has equivalent capacity and capability to carry out those functions as they are currently carried out. Would you agree that that should actually be embedded into the withdrawal bill as a basic principle of good governance?
The fundamental principle of this bill is to carry forward the legislation that we have and to ensure that the statute book and indeed the agencies that implement it continue to function in the way that people would expect the day after we leave the European Union. I mean, that is the fundamental purpose of the bill, and departments are working through ensuring that we are able to deliver that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Jonathan.